You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for February 9th, 2026, and I'm Jaden Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we hop into the latest film from Pixar Studios.
How long you been planning that one there?
Not very long. It has been a crazy day, and I've been having all kinds of tech issues as we are starting to record this. For those of you listening, you will not notice any sort of difference, so don't worry. For those on the podcast side, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but if you're watching on YouTube, you may notice my normal camera settings are a little bit different. It's been insane. It's just been a crazy busy day in general, because this weekend, in the spirit of Pixar and Disney, we are taking our kids to Disney World because it is my youngest third birthday this coming weekend, the same day as the Oscars. How fun is that?
Oh, that's lovely. He better become a movie lover. If the first thing he asks you is, "Daddy, what won Best Picture?" then you know you raised him right.
Or did I? I don't know if that's the first question I want him to ask.
You got him into a new obsession.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Hopefully, his first question is around the idea of Hoppers not being in 2D animation, and why was it in 3D? Because Daniel Chong releasing that 2D animated sequence on social media, I don't know if that helped or hurt his cause.
Honestly, I think it hurt. We could talk more about it as this conversation unfolds. It doesn't necessarily hurt the movie itself, but it definitely hurts the narrative a little bit.
Perhaps. It was quite fascinating. And I understand the response to those wanting the 2D animated version of Hoppers, even if it is contradictory to the Pixar ethos. Mm-hmm. Man, that footage looked quite interesting. I will say this, if I'm going to defend him, and we'll talk about this in the review, obviously, the animation is still different comparatively to most Pixar movies. So there is that element of it. And also, as much as I love the 2D sequence he threw out there, it also veers really close to we're just imitating Ghibli.
Well, let's go there. And I hear a lot of people saying, why wasn't Hoppers animated in that way? And the reason why is because that movie already exists. It's called Pompoko. That movie exists already.
Yeah. And look, I understand, very much get both sides of the argument. And while I might have wanted a 2D animated version of Hoppers, I mean, at the same time, it is like that footage is just so Ghibli-esque. And I don't know if we want Pixar to just become the North American version of Ghibli, just a straight up imitation. I don't know if we really want that.
I don't think we want that either, because Pixar has done a very good job creating their own identity and their own brand, even though they've been inspired by Ghibli over the years. As of late, we've seen a lot more Ghibli creep into their films, most notably films like Luca and Turning Red especially. Turning Red's very Japanese anime generally, right? There's a lot of influence bleeding into that film. So to your point, I like when Pixar just behaves like Pixar. Like, we don't need to see them be Ghibli. And like I said, with regard to the movie Hoppers and what this movie is going for thematically, which we'll talk about, it's very Pompoko. It's very Princess Mononoke. Like, a lot of these themes already exist in those Ghibli movies.
Oh, for sure. This is, just in terms of its thematic underbelly, probably the most Ghibli movie in the canon. Speaking of Hoppers, it is very Ghibli inspired.
I would say
in terms of its ideas, for sure.
Luca is probably the most Ghibli inspired visually, but this is definitely the most Ghibli inspired underneath all of that.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, and we'll certainly talk about that, for better or worse. We'll talk about whether it fully commits to its ideas or not. But the inspiration is there. for sure.
Yeah.
And if we saw that in 2D, very akin to that footage that was released, it might have been too Ghibli that I feel like the response would be, this is just an imitation.
It would have been Pompoko. I'm serious. Just with beavers instead of raccoons.
Yeah.
Or quote-unquote
exactly.
raccoons. Like that.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a valid criticism. And I think that's why, for those that saw the footage and were like, why don't we just have this all the time from Pixar? I think you need to pump the brakes a little bit there.
Agreed.
Because if we really did get that, I don't know if that would be your genuine response to that.
I agree.
I feel like there would be more pushback than there would be favor for it.
People just need things to push back on. That's basically what the narrative is.
I think the response to that footage was simply a love of Ghibli. I think that's all it was. Perhaps, we love Studio Ghibli, so anytime we see a form of it, we get excited. I think that's where the spirit of that was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
But we are here to talk about Pixar's latest. It is called Hoppers. And, usually we do some sort of table setting here. I don't know in this case if we need to. We've talked about Pixar quite a bit.
Yeah.
Last year on the show, Brendan and I did a Pixar consensus ranking where we talked a lot about Pixar and our updated feelings on a bunch of those movies. And then this last week on the main show, 677, we did a draft talking about most of the Pixar filmography. And again, diving into those films there. So we've given our thoughts on the Pixar canon, broadly speaking. And generally it's, their filmography is pretty great overall. Now, we can debate where the studio has gone over the last 15 years. It does feel as if it has fluctuated quite a bit, and that's left a lot of room for subjectivity and debate.
I think everyone can at least agree on two things: when their golden period was and when their drop-off happened. I feel like that's pretty much set in stone. As far as what comes after that drop-off, that's where we get some varying degrees of opinions, right? Some people really like certain things that these recent films have been doing. Like the small scale attributes of movies like Luca, for instance, certainly warmed our hearts. Like you and I consider that to be upper tier Pixar, but that's not the consensus for a movie like that.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you and I even differ on, let's say, something like Turning Red, which I like a lot more than you do, even though we're both high on that movie, but there's definitely a difference of how high of an opinion we have for that movie. And then you also like Inside Out 2 a lot more than I do. So like in a way, we kind of represent those extremes that later Pixar has been representing as of late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's made for some fascinating conversation for sure.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of our conversation as far as our draft was concerned, because the top 5 for both of us chalked that up to even
the golden period. Yeah,
exactly. It really came down to what you were just talking about, that subjective era, I guess, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
And just kind of, it just depends on what film gravitates to you.
But man, Pixar really did spoil us when we were in the 2000s, didn't they? Especially in the later 2000s. Once they wrapped up Cars, they had a string of movies, 4 or 5 movies, where each one of them was basically the best movie of its respective year. Like that's how high on the world that they were.
Yeah,
it's insane.
I know. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
I mean, Ratatouille, maybe the best movie of 2007. At least I might argue it could be.
Sure.
WALL-E, maybe the best movie of its year. Up. You and I seem to like Up a lot more than some other people, but even that one was regarded as one of the 10 best movies of that year in 2009. Toy Story 3, 2010, maybe the best movie of that year.
Yeah, very much. And Inside Out was my favorite movie of its year. Now, I know that's a little bit post that golden era, but I think it's as good as any movie in
It feels like it comes from that era. It almost felt like a leftover, and they released it later or something like that.
Exactly. Good stuff. And maybe we'll talk about where we think Hoppers fits into our ranking of Pixar when we get to the end of this.
30 movies in total. This is insane.
Pretty wild. I do want to note real fast, the director here Daniel Chong. This is his directorial debut as far as Pixar movies go, I believe. I think it's actually his second film. Although Bears, was that a feature film?
I think it was like an animated short special.
Was it a short?
No,
Okay.
it's not a short. It's 69
70
minutes
minutes?
long. Yeah. So, I guess it's technically a movie.
Yeah,
but
I haven't seen it, which is why I sound uncertain about it.
Yeah, the Bear Bears the movie is what it's called.
Yes.
It's a Cartoon Network property.
Okay.
So that is his
like
his
an
debut.
hour-ish television movie? Is
Yeah,
that
it's a
what
special,
that
I
is?
guess we can call it.
Special?
Yeah.
His first feature cinematic movie, we'll say that,
Yeah.
Hoppers. But he's been working with Pixar since Cars 2 as a story artist. And then since 2022 with Turning Red, he has been a part of the Pixar senior creative team. So he's been around for quite a few years, working on Turning Red, Lightyear, Elemental, Inside Out 2, among others, and then getting the directorial nod here for Hoppers. So I wanted to note that as well, an interesting narrative with this film.
And it's also worth noting too that, like many of Pixar's latest original films specifically, it doesn't have a co-director either.
Yes. Yeah.
And I like that. I like when that happens.
And a single screenplay credit, Jesse Andrews. The both of them get story credits, obviously working together as a director and screenwriter tandem here, but one director, one screenplay, that typically, not always, but bodes pretty well for a movie rather than a bunch of interference. And
because it feels like it came from an individual's creative mind, right?
Yes.
And we'll talk about that when it comes down to Hoppers and whether it works or not, but the fact of the matter is this does feel like it came from an individual mind. I'll simply say that to get things started.
For sure. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into this. So Hoppers, as we just noted there, directed by Daniel Chong. It stars Piper Curto, Bobby Monahan, John Hamm, Kathy Najimy, Dave Franco, among others. Forgive me, I'm butchering some of those names there. Isaiah Whitlock Jr. has a small role here as well. Meryl Streep in a smaller role. I'm sure we'll talk about some of these other cameos that we get throughout the film.
Sure.
If you're not familiar with Hoppers, it is about a 19-year-old animal lover who uses technology that places her consciousness into a robotic beaver to uncover mysteries within the animal world beyond her imagination. If that sounds a little bit familiar, don't worry. We'll get to it as the film very much acknowledges its inspirations.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it, but we'll at least acknowledge that it's in the movie.
We can acknowledge it's in the movie. All right, Brendan, what did you think about Hoppers?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm kind of liking this era of modern day Pixar where they seem to be giving their original films creative license for individual filmmakers to really tell their own stories. They might be working with other writers, but they're usually from a sole director's brain in some ways.
Yes.
Luca was that way. Domi Shi, the director of Turning Red, that felt like it was very much her movie. And I like when they do this. They don't always land with me personally, but I want to see Pixar do these more often, and I want to see these movies succeed. I want to see them do well at the box office, and it looks like Hoppers might be able to get to that point, which is kind of exciting to see. It's why I was kind of excited to see a movie like Elemental have such surprising legs at the tail end of its run. I didn't fully love that movie, but that's another one of those movies that felt like it was from the mind of an individual filmmaker. And that's why I respect Hoppers so much. I will say the first half of Hoppers, I was somewhat on board with. I was admittedly getting a little bit of Elio energy at times where it did feel like there was some sanitizing happening from the Pixar corporate Disney umbrella specifically. I guess maybe that's just expectations because I went into this knowing how strange and zany that this movie apparently is, and I wasn't quite sensing it in that first half. I was sensing it at times, but not in full. At times, it kind of reminded me a bit more of an Illumination film than it did anything else. But there is a very key pivotal thing that happens at the midpoint where this thing gets Gore Verbinski levels of strange, and I was with it. And I was completely sold by the time it reached its very imaginative back half. And that's what I was really surprised by this movie. I think the back half especially, it's wildly imaginative. That's the best word I can describe for this thing. And it weirdly does have some very complex ideas on its mind that I'm sure we'll talk about that are certainly Ghibli-esque, but I love that they're throwing that in here in a movie that is essentially marketed to kids. And the way it deals with, in some ways, political violence and revolution and the moral gray area between man versus nature. Like I said, it is very Ghibli-esque, and Ghibli has tackled these themes before in other movies, but their movies are not always marketed just to kids, right? This one is. And I love that we're getting something this complex strictly for the mind of a child in that audience. And that was refreshing. And I think when it reaches its climax, I was fully on board with it. It didn't always work in getting there. It took me a little while to really finally recognize that. But when I did, I was kind of blown away by certain elements of it. So I do think it's a very good movie overall. A little bit inconsistent, but I do think it's very good overall.
Yeah, when it comes to Hoppers, I'm of two minds with this. And I do want to ask for some grace and patience because of my weekend and then prepping to take the kids to go to Disney. It's been crazy busy. I haven't had as much time to really wrestle with this film as I typically do when we come into these reviews. And I certainly don't have as many notes prepared as I typically try to do, as I obviously want to give these conversations as much justice as possible.
Sure.
So if I sound a little scrambled here, I do ask for some grace up front.
I sound scrambled all the time, so it's all good.
so same too. That's why I have to do the homework. But I'm of two minds with this. I think simply on its face, without any of the politics or the film's thematic underbelly, just looking at it as a story in what unfolds, I do think there's a lot to really like here. I do think it's quite moving in the end.
Sure.
I think maybe the best way to articulate it for me is that it plays out like a crossover between Avatar, which is the aforementioned film that I was alluding to when throwing out the synopsis there, because that synopsis is basically the plot of Avatar.
Oh, yeah. And this
That
movie
first
gets
Avatar.
away with it by basically saying,
Yeah.
oh, this is Avatar.
Yeah, it
And
makes a direct reference to Avatar. So
Yeah,
it's very much in on the joke.
Avatar exists in the world of this movie.
Very much so.
James Cameron exists in the world of this movie. Let's think about that for a
I'd
second.
love to see him show up in this film. But yeah, this film plays out like a crossover between Avatar and the Wild Robot. There's a lot of the Wild Robot here as well. And
I know
that's
that too.
probably coincidental more than anything else, but there is a lot of that here. And all of that is funneled through that classic Pixar emotion that we love and cherish. And I think that on its face is effective. When we look at those opening sequences that are very much up like in terms of that dynamic, except this time, instead of it being this married couple, it's a grandma and a young child.
Yeah.
And you get that incredible dynamic, that emotion that's bubbling, that eventually, again, this is in the first 5 minutes, so this is not a spoiler,
Right.
but it crystallizes with her growing up and her grandma dying. So it very much has that up like sentimentality that hooks you in that classic Pixar way.
Right.
And that I think is quite effective.
Sure.
And then as Mabel gets into her antics and she starts doing her avatar, if you will,
Starts doing her avataring.
Again, the friendships that she develops and the dynamic there is quite endearing and charming as well. And then as it all crystallizes, it's trying to set up, the cordiality that can happen, the bipartisanship that is possible between two sides of a spectrum.
Sure.
And it's affable in those attempts. And again, when it's channeled through that classic Pixar emotion, I think, again, simply with what plays out on the surface, there's fun to be had, even if it gets insanely goofy at times.
Oh yeah.
It very much literally jumps the shark, flies the shark, if you will.
I loved that shark. When that happens, like, oh, this is what people were talking. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sold. I'm sold.
Yeah, it flies the shark. So it gets quite goofy in its plot machinations and its antics. But then there's the conversation to be had about the film's thematic underbelly and its politics. And that's where I think it gets interesting. I think there's certainly a ton of gray area. I don't think it all works.
Sure.
I think it's a bit hypocritical in many regards. And also, it's just going to depend on your own political views and what you carry into this film. And I've seen takes all over the place. I think what's interesting is that I've seen far leftists criticize this film because of how murky its politics are, and the way that it fails to commit to its ideas on environmentalism or the relationship between Mabel and the mayor and how cozy that ultimately crystallizes in the end. A lot of people on the left side don't love that.
Sure.
But then I've seen reactions from MAGA who equally hate this for very different reasons.
For the exact opposite reasons. Yeah.
For the exact opposite reasons.
It's like, man, are we that distant from bipartisanship nowadays? It seems so.
I think so. And so a lot of people are really not loving the politics of this movie. You could even say most people aren't loving the politics of this movie because it fails to commit to its ideas ultimately. And I do think that is the one thing that holds this film from being great. I think in terms of its characters, again, the on the surface buffoonery that is to be had, and the moments where it aims for that childish behavior. Again, I say that complimentary. The things we love from Pixar in that regard, I think it succeeds there. But when it tries to dig beneath the surface, and I do think the best Pixar films are able to do this quite well, I think this film fails pretty drastically.
Okay.
In that regard. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but I don't think it comes together. And I think it's because it's just trying to dip its toe in. Like it's not like it wants to be about environmentalism. It wants to maybe be about bipartisanship. And it feels a little too warm and cozy, a bit of a soft blanket when it's dealing with quite bitter and harsh realities, especially in 2026. And look, when they were making this movie, they did not foresee at all what 2026 would be like because these films take years to produce.
Yeah.
But it is really hard to separate, and I don't blame people for failing to do so, really hard to separate what is happening in the world right now with what this film is. And maybe that's why Hoppers is one of those movies where it's something we have to reevaluate in another 10, 15, 20 years when we can remove 2026 from the equation. Because right now it feels a little icky. It feels a little murky to play it safe the way that it does. And at least that was my feeling walking out of it. I think I do share a lot of those criticisms in terms of its politics and what unfolds here. So I'm of two minds with it. I do really like it. I was moved by the emotion, despite the politics. But when I do inject politics into the conversation, it did leave a little bit to be desired for me. So it's, again, I think that's why ultimately I'm somewhere in the middle with this.
Yeah.
I don't know where, but somewhere there.
So let me ask a question just to, kind of get more in the weeds here, if you don't mind. Do you think the solution would have been if it maybe veered more towards one side or the other, or does the picking of a side not really matter? It's just more the commitment to maybe that moral gray area that's kind of the issue.
I think generally it's for me, I would prefer it to just commit to something.
Okay.
And and that I think is probably what's, I guess the reason I'm kind of mumbling here, or the reason I hesitate, is because even if it commits to its ideas on environmentalism, for example, that's going to rub a lot of other people the wrong way. I guess there is a sense that no matter where it goes, it's going to lead to futility with a certain sect of audiences. For me personally, and I can only speak for me, I just wish that it committed one way or the other.
Okay. No, and I think that's fair. And I think there's a way this film could have gone about trying to find some middle ground where it didn't feel quite as sanitized. And I did use that word in my opening thoughts.
Yeah.
It does sometimes feel like the edges are shaved off a little bit. At least it did for me in that first half, because like I said, I was sometimes getting some Elio-like energy where it did feel like Disney as a corporate overlord was kind of interfering on certain things. And then the zaniness of that back half sort of won me over. I did appreciate that this movie was at least attempting to find some kind of middle ground, but I don't necessarily disagree with your criticisms that there isn't that much gracefulness in how it taps into maybe that middle ground. And that's why I think the comparisons to movies like Pompoko or Princess Mononoke are kind of apt, because those are movies that do very much like analyze the middle, more moderate mentality of such conflict. And they do it in a way that's very provocative. They don't just dip their toes into those issues. They try to at least find perspectives on both sides, even if those movies do veer one way or the other. It does pick a side, but it doesn't create it as an agenda, right? It doesn't do it very safely. And I think Hoppers is a movie that's perhaps, and maybe this is me giving the movie the benefit of the doubt, and I shouldn't be doing this, but maybe it is trying to oversimplify those complex themes because it knows that children are the audience, the target audience. And I do appreciate that, but at the same time, we're cinephiles. We can't help but compare this to other animated movies that did this thing very much better, right?
Yeah.
And it does make this movie kind of feel like it is more of a weakened version of a very complicated argument. So it sounds like the solution is maybe one of two things. To your point, maybe it does commit to a side rather, or it finds a new way to address that moderate mentality that still feels kind of aggressive and maybe even polarizing. But it does feel like maybe by the end it is trying to, and I don't know if this was intentional, but it does kind of feel like it's taking a more safe route by the time it does end. And I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. And I think part of where I struggle is that ultimately this is a Pixar movie. It's not aiming to be a Best Picture nominee directed by Jane Campion.
Sure.
Or something to that effect. Or Hayao Miyazaki doing
I was going to say, it's
movie.
not Hayao Miyazaki coming in to make a Pixar movie.
Yeah, or something to that effect. It is Pixar working outside of their normal sandbox and delving into politics. And I guess to a certain degree, I can appreciate that. And again, in terms of its zaniness, I think it is quite effective, but it is jumping into the pool of highly contested topics that are currently ongoing in, let's just call it for what it is, pretty vicious ways at the moment. And the result is the left and the right are now entering into putting their ring or their hats into the ring, and they're both now criticizing the film for not committing or for demonstrating an idea that they don't agree with. And by being in the middle, all it's done is create a discourse that it just murkies the waters even further.
Yeah. And sorry, I don't mean to cut you off because I know you're making a point here, but this is why I think comparing this movie even further to something like Princess Mononoke is very valid in emphasizing this criticism. Because when you look at a movie like Hoppers here, a movie that is trying to find a more moderate mentality, all it's doing is alienating these people even further. Yet I feel like weirdly, if you showed Princess Mononoke to these same parties, if you want to be very specific about that, I feel like there's more of a likelihood of that movie making both people kind of like, okay, let's talk to each other for a little bit, you know? And that's kind of
Yeah.
the challenging aspect of a movie like Princess Mononoke. That's what makes that movie so effective. And I think Hoppers is maybe trying to do that. It is
Yeah.
trying to, make individuals find some kind of bipartisanship once again. But it seems to only be heightening that divide even further. And I think in this case, I think that's less to do with the people that it's targeting and more to do with the movie not doing enough of the work to invite that conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that might be the biggest issue there.
Well, and I think part of that is the zaniness does get in the way of it all.
It does. Yeah, that's a fair
And
point.
That, because the film can't really get into the depths to give credence to that conversation because we have to consider the avatarness of what's happening as well.
Yeah.
And also and this is expected, there's the characterization of Mabel and her choices and the consequences of her choices and the arc and the learning curve of the character as well. And there's a lot to dissect with her character as someone who is very politically against the mayor and is wanting to save the glade at all costs. And the mayor is going to build this highway that's going to destroy the glade. And he just doesn't care. He doesn't care at all. In fact, he goes as far as to build these fake trees that I don't even know what it ejects some sort of frequency that humans can't hear, but the animals can hear, and so it drives them away.
Yeah.
That is a malicious choice from the mayor. And the film doesn't really want to wrestle with that as much. It does a little bit, but I don't think it goes as far as it should have given the maliciousness of it.
Yeah.
Now, maybe the counter argument of that is to say, well, they do try to kill him. They do try to assassinate him. And Mabel and her gang have to try to save him. But I don't know if going that route is the same thing as wrestling with his malicious choices and why Mabel finds herself in the situations that she does.
Yeah.
But again, that just speaks to, again, the murkiness of it all in the film, not really knowing the depths it's getting into and not having the time to really articulate its ideas, because the other element here, the insects in the room, if you will, because elephants aren't really applicable in this case.
Yeah, there's no elephant in this movie.
There's no elephant, but there are insects and snakes and birds. And we get to this moment where they have to summon this council. And that includes the beaver king and the snake king and the insect queen, and all of these different animals are at play. And without getting into too many spoilers, let's just say that political violence happens in this movie. There are two, not one, but two political assassinations that take place here.
I think there's more than that, actually.
Is there more than that? There's at least two.
There are moments in this movie where I was thinking, like, man, did Daniel Chong just quickly watch one battle after another and try to incorporate some like political like thing into this or something like that? But yeah, there are a lot of assassinations in this movie.
Yeah, there's at least two direct assassinations on top of the animals. Some of the animals, I should say. Again, I want to avoid spoilers in case people haven't seen this, but some of the animals commit to a plan to, as they call it, squash the human king, the mayor, in this film. So there's at least two direct assassinations and then an attempt on a third.
Yeah.
And of course, Mabel and her friends have to, find a way to intervene. And that has, rubbed itself the wrong way with some as well, because Mabel is trying to create bipartisanship with someone who was, by all intents and purposes, early on in the film, not willing to be equals.
Yeah.
Again, his plan was quite malicious and evil and violent, and he did not care. The only time he cared was when his life was on the line. So what does that suggest? That political violence or the threat of violence or the potential for violence,
That actually
that's
works.
what's effective in creating change? Is
Even though the
that
film's
what we're
message
trying
is
to?
even though the film's message is very much not that by the end.
But it's not. And again, that's where I go back to the film not really wrestling with what it's trying to say and what it's doing, because but just based off the actions that take place here, that is kind of the message.
Unintentional, I would say.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but I think that's an easy reading to have here, even though you are right that it's also trying to create this pathway for bipartisanship. But
Yeah.
but that bipartisanship, how does that come about? That doesn't come
it
about
doesn't-
because the mayor has a moral and ethical change of heart. That's not at all what happens.
That's not what happens either. And I think your description there, I think, is hitting the nail on the head as to what the film's biggest issue is and what it is for me. Before I get there, I want to at least acknowledge that I like the idea of Mabel kind of accidentally creating this political revolution, right? That her actions had really bad consequences.
Yeah.
I don't know if it fully realizes that idea, but I like that idea is here. The film's
and real quick, sorry to butt in real fast before you continue.
yeah.
But the moment, the action that sparks this revolution, I did not see that coming.
That's amazing. That is a
It was quite
hell of
the
a
moment.
Pixar moment.
Yeah.
But I think what you were talking about there, I think you hit the nail on the head as to what the film's biggest issue is. It is purely the Mayor Jerry character, who I think is a lame character, an absolutely lame character. I love John Hamm, and he is clearly having the time of his life voicing this character, but I don't know what the solution is, because on one hand, I like that he is introduced as essentially a mustache twirling villain. That's fine, okay? And he has a lot of fun with that, okay?
Yeah.
And I feel like the film's intent is to try to pull the rug from under our feet, that a man who is presented as a mustache twirling villain can have a change of heart. The problem is that the film doesn't do the work to earn that change of heart.
Exactly.
And
That's my thing.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. The only reason he changes is because he was scared out of his gourd. He was provoked to change by violence or the threat of violence that became very real, which is heightened even further now that we're talking about it out loud here.
Yeah.
That sequence when he first hears Mabel through the earpiece, and his immediate reaction was, "Oh, I'm dreaming. This isn't real. This is just a dream.
Yeah.
Not real at all." And then the car crashes, and then he realized, "Oh no, this is happening."
Yeah.
So as soon as the threat is real and he has to take it seriously, and then by the course of Mabel and some of the choices that she makes, the threat is undermined to a degree. And when the fire is put out, I'll say vaguely, but if you've seen the film, the
You know
literal
what we're
fires
talking
as
about.
well.
Yep.
When that is put out, he had nothing to do with that. He had nothing to do with that. So his only course of action politically was to pander to her in some sort of way. It's not as if he had any sort of ethical epiphany. Maybe a bit of an emotional one. But again, the message is here is to scare the shit out of your local politicians or even your national politicians. That's the play here. Again, that might not have been Pixar's intent, but that's ultimately how it plays out. And again, I think that idea is just going to come down to your own political views. Some people might look at that and go, yes, bravo, Pixar. Absolutely scare the shit out of your politicians. We should be doing that. Others might be wary about that, might be more cautious about that, and feel a little bit more icky about how that plays out here.
There's
It just
definitely
depends on where you sit.
Well, I don't mind a movie that's trying to find that middle ground depending on where you sit, but sometimes a movie can come off as just merely confused. And I think this is more the latter. And like I said, I praise this movie for the most part in its back half, primarily because of its zaniness and the fact that for a kids' film, it's at least committed to go places. But the commitment to those places has cracks. There are cracks in the dam, if you will. And at least, once again, making the comparison to Princess Mononoke, again, which we've done way too much on this podcast, at least a character like Lady Eboshi in that movie, as villainous as she may be and how her actions certainly are deliberate, there is still an argument that what she was doing industrially was for the betterment and the protection of her people. And that was believed. And that added a huge gray area to that movie that made all of the difference.
I agree.
And something like that key thing, if you want to turn Mayor Jerry into less of a mustache twirly villain and humanize him a bit more, from a storytelling angle, you need that thing. You need that hook. And this movie doesn't have that hook.
I agree. And that's why I think it's, like, I don't know if I want to say emotionally flat, but maybe thematically confused, as you laid out there. Maybe that's the best way to phrase it.
Yeah.
And it is the thing that really holds me back from loving this, whether I agree or disagree with some of those ideas. I think that is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But I do think it is quite confused. And as a result, I can see why both people on the left and the right will look at this and throw some arrows at it. And I think it's deserved. Yeah. I do think it's justified, even if I love Mabel as a character. I love what she's trying to achieve. I find her incredibly affable and lovable. And I do appreciate that so much of the challenges that are provoked here are her own doing.
Yeah,
she gets in her own way. She's the antagonist to her own story in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that, it at the very least creates an interesting an interesting arc for her to overcome.
Yeah. And the ripple effect of that is really
as
intriguing. Yeah.
Yes.
I love all that stuff. I think that's very bold and very daring. And I also love Piper Kierda's voice performance. I think it's a really great voice performance. I love all the actors in this movie for the work that they're doing. Bobby Moynihan as King George, I think, is also very effective. And I called out John Hamm, even though I don't love the writing of Mayor Jerry. John Hamm is clearly having a ball. Should we reveal at least one of the voice actors that comes up at the end through Metamorphosis? We'll simply say.
Sure.
His name is in the cast list, so it's not really a spoiler to say if you just simply go to the IMDb page, his name is weirdly up at the top. But Dave Franco as the Insect King is kind of awesome.
I think I even read it earlier.
Oh, you did? Okay, I didn't know.
I'm pretty sure
I
I
may have blanked out at that point. I usually blank out when you give the synopses.
Yeah, no, it's fair. Pretty wild, and I think he's really great as well. And again, like I think that's provoked some fascinating conversation, at least with some of the discourse on social media, right? Because on one hand, you have the mayor and his plans acting as some sort of antagonist here. And then because of the antics of the council and what plays out there, again, much of it at the literal hands of Mabel, I'll say again, without going to get the spoilers. There are two other villains here.
Yeah.
And again, it ends in this incredible, weird, and interesting Verbinski type way, as you noted earlier, that on its face, I do think it's quite enjoyable. And I don't want that to be lost. I know we're kind of getting into the weeds of the film's politics, but on its face, all of that and how it plays out, and Franco and his vocal performance, there is a lot of fun to be had there. Like, I think, at least for me, I was able to separate myself from the politics to just enjoy what's happening there on the surface. I am able to do that. Some people might not be able to. Yeah. I was able to do that. Even if, as we've demonstrated in this conversation, to a certain extent, the politics are going to invite you back in, and then you have to consider those as far as your overall enjoyment of the film. But I do like a lot of how that plays out there. I think what's also interesting, though, another angle that we haven't really talked about here, the Beaver King, King George, I believe, is the name of the character.
Yeah.
This has also sparked some interesting conversation. And again, I think this is one of those elements where we might have to simply revisit this at another time, 15, 20 years, when we're able to remove ourselves from the context of 2026, if we're able to do so at all. If anything changes over the next 15 to 20 years, I don't know. But there's this ethos with King George where he simply wants to see the best in everybody.
Yeah.
That is really, really hard to wrap your mind around as it relates to, again, the context of 2026. That honestly might be the most, I don't want to say problematic, but for me, maybe the most challenging aspect to this film. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Maybe that is a compliment to this film.
Well,
but when you look back at the mayor and all the nefarious things that he's doing, as I noted earlier, and other characters that denote evil intentions that arise in the back half of this film, King George's ethos doesn't change. Like, he wants to see the good in them. And that ethos does funnel itself into Mabel, which then eventually leads into this bipartisanship that we get at the end of the film that I don't think is earned. And honestly, it's the part of this film that feels the most anti-2026. Now, again, they didn't make this film knowing where things were going to go. So that might be less of a criticism and more of an observation as to how it plays this year, which is why, again, I go back to, let's revisit this down the line. But in the theater, as I was watching it, man, that might be the part of this film that I'm having to wrestle with the most, to be honest.
It feels incomplete to me. And I don't think the idea or the notion is really the problem.
Yeah, it's an affable idea. It really is. And maybe it says more about me than anything else. That I struggle to see the good in everybody, especially the people running the world that we live in.
Well, I think if the movie wants to have that theme, the movie's job is to then convince you that, oh, maybe I can find the good in everyone at some point.
Yes.
That it needs to do that work. I actually think that idea of bipartisanship, this moderate mentality that we keep talking about, that this movie seems to have on its mind, I think given how divided we are now, that's kind of an affable theme. That might be the theme we need to hear, but it needs to, the movie itself needs to do the work to make us actually want to listen to that conversation and feel like we can believe that. And I think this is a movie that cuts corners to get to that solution. And
and that's why I go back to the context of 2026, because we live in a world where that idea just isn't really applicable right now. And
there's a lot of people that maybe don't deserve that.
And there's a lot of people that don't deserve it. Like, and again, that's why it might just speak more about me than anybody else. And I'm certainly willing to admit that it might be more of a me thing than the film. But when I look at the world, that ethos of King George, while affable, certainly admirable, I wish that I could share in his enthusiasm. But there's a lot of leaders that absolutely do not deserve it. And
fair.
It's created, like, there's so much violence and death as a result that to invoke that ethos, I think, it would be disingenuous. And again, that's why it just might be more of a me thing. I'd love to revisit this, let's say, in another 4 to 6 years.
If it ends up being, maybe if there was something about the movie that ended up being kind of predictive in 4 to 6 years or something, that might actually work in its favor. But I think it really just says something about the movie feeling a little bit incomplete, that King George has this very optimistic point of view. And all the movie had to do was at least get us to see his point of view and think, okay, I can see how and why he sees the good in everyone. I don't necessarily buy into that right now. I don't know if I believe it, but I can understand why he does. And I think ultimately that's what the film is missing.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I do think the film, maybe it gets there to some degree, I don't know. There's just from the moment we meet him, there's this incessant optimism with him that, again, it is affable. That is the best way to articulate it for sure. And like him continuing that ethos, even when he sees all of this carnage happening around him, the idea that the glade is just somewhere where these animals can't live anymore. Like he never considers what's happening there.
He's very ignorant. He's very innocent.
Very
ignorant. And I don't necessarily mind that if they were to make that part of his arc, but something needed to have happened for him to still hold on to those optimistic beliefs. And I don't think that's the problem. Like the problem is not that he still holds on to them. The problem is that there's no context in the movie that allows us to believe why he would still hold on to them.
Exactly. I mean, really the only thing we get with him is that his dad saw him as some sort of outcast, threw him out, and then he was able to regain the kingdom because his father died or something to that effect.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we really learn about him, but that doesn't really give us insight into his eternal optimism. Like, in fact, those things feel totally separate.
Yeah.
Mabel tries to connect them in that moment when he's talking to her about what happened to him, but it feels like there's not much connective tissue there, if any at all.
There's a gap. There's
very much a gap. I agree.
I will say where I do like his optimism, it's more to do with the film's sense of humor than it does its thematic bite. The introduction of their world and the whole natural order of things and how he still maintains this optimism, this contradictory optimism about how, oh yeah, we always look out for each other, but when it's time for you to get eaten, you must get eaten. Like I think that's really funny. And I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if that's the movie weirdly calling out its own political hypocrisies. If it is, then that might be kind of brilliant, but that's maybe just
again, that's
accident.
Not well earned. Like that.
I know.
Me despise the film more. I think
that's fair. Like I, in a way, it's maybe just them trying to throw like a last ditch effort into the movie to get away with where they realize, oh, we're not tying this together well enough. So
if the film had really earned that dichotomy, that would have been incredible.
It would have. But
I don't think the film even comes close to earning that, which
is fair.
Just murkies the waters further. And I guess if I had to simplify it, and again, I hate to keep coming back to this, but it's hard to separate the world that we're living in, which is quite dire. And it's in our face constantly all the time right now. So when you see this film and you have a character in King George who sees optimism and hey, we should see the best in everybody. Yeah. Doesn't matter who. It could be your best friend. It could be your mortal enemy. You got to see the best in them. And oh, by the way, we need to learn to work together. We need to be bipartisanship and let's work together and we can figure things out together. That's the message this film wants to carry in a world that is ultra violent and divisive. And I don't again, I think that's just me projecting into the world that we're living in now. And why I feel terrible to criticize the film, because it is wanting to do good. It is wanting, spiritually, I think it is, I want to love that. Like spiritually speaking, emotionally, I do want to love that. Ideally, in an idealistic world, that's something I would love to teach my boys as well. Look for the best in everybody. Treat them with love and respect, even if you don't agree with them. And you can have a cordial discourse. You can have a debate and find some sort of middle ground. That is ultimately a great message to have. It is. Yeah. But it also ignores, and the reason I think it's fair to bring this up is because the film invites this through its actions, the characters, its plot machinations. It does invite this as well, that when you have characters in power exploiting everything they can in vile ways, those ideals fall flat. They don't.
It makes it harder to make us believe in those ideas.
It makes it exactly.
And the movie has a much harder job trying to convince us of that. And it sets itself up for failure, essentially. Now, the movie would have been a massive success if it found a way to make us believe in that sense
Yeah.
of bipartisanship. And I think
And
that is what
yeah,
it's do, because I think, generally speaking, it sounds like we at least agree on this. The film's message on its face is not really something we disagree with. We just don't really agree with the way it's going about getting there and the timing of how it's going about that. Like
yeah.
that's where there's a lot of problems there.
And then there's of course the irony that it wants to portray goodness. Hey,
Mhm.
find that goodness in everybody, and hey, let's work together and be bipartisan. It wants that, but then there's the irony that the only way to get that is through violence and threat.
Yeah, that's kind of
Like,
I don't want to say it's kind
okay.
of funny is not the right word, but there's something creepily ironic about that.
Yeah, and I don't think the film is aware of that irony. That's the thing.
Mhm.
If that was very purposeful, then okay, maybe I take a step back and I give the film credit for that,
Mhm.
and maybe I can lower some of the reservations I've thrown out here in this conversation.
Mhm.
But I don't think that's at all what the film was trying to do.
That's probably not. Yeah.
I think that irony is simply born out of the film being confused, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
its politics just being extremely murky and ignorant and lacking awareness, self-awareness, which again, ironic given that it is very self-aware in its plot machinations as far as it being this Avatar ripoff, but it is not self-aware in its political machinations.
No, not quite. I
And
think if this movie had the same gracefulness of something like a Pom Poko or Princess Mononoke, we might be singing a different tune. I think we could be.
mhm. And to give Daniel Chong and Jesse Andrews a bit of credit here, or at least, to give them the benefit of the doubt, because there was an old report circulating today. I forget who threw it out there. I wish I could remember off the cuff here. I'd have to go and look it up. But there was an old report that I saw circulating that Disney executives told the Pixar creative team to pull back on its themes of environmentalism, that it was going too strong.
Mhm.
So a lot of this middle ground that we're talking about here that is confused and manufactured, that might not be a Chong and Andrews problem, that very much could have been a Disney executive getting in the way of this film and therefore hurting its potential greatness.
Mhm.
And I hate to give that credence because, and we'll talk about this on the main show this week, the box office for this is quite promising.
Yeah.
I hate that a Disney executive meddled and kind of won.
Well, in a way, it does kind of make the film's themes on bipartisanship seem like an accident then, right?
Mhm.
If that meddling were true. Even though I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that being the theme here, like I think that's a worthy theme to explore, perhaps that's the reason why it feels undercooked, right?
Yeah.
Like we keep talking about how some of its themes feel very underutilized. At least they're not explored as deeply as I think they want to be. And perhaps it is because there was a very different version of this movie that was originally conceived before it got meddled with, which is and whenever that happens, that's when things become overly simplified. That's why a movie like Elio, Pixar's last original film, felt kind of sanitized. Like it felt like a
Yeah.
movie that was corporately mandated in a way. And this film
Yeah.
doesn't. It still feels like the vision of a filmmaker, but it does feel like some of those visions were sanitized a little bit. And maybe it does come down to that
Yeah.
unfortunate meddling, if that were true. If that were the case, perhaps that's why the film's themes feel so undercooked.
Mhm. And as you were talking there, I did find the tweet. Friend of the show, Jeff Zhang, brought this up earlier today. I wanted to give credit where credit is due. I knew I saw it from somebody.
Gotcha.
He was quote tweeting the original report, basically articulating in a simple sentence what we have been talking about in this conversation as far as the overall film feeling the effects of this meddling.
Yeah.
But the original tweet came from December 27th, 2024.
Okay.
So quite a bit ago. The report was that a former Pixar staffer had revealed that Disney told them to downplay themes of environmentalism for the upcoming movie Hoppers.
Okay.
Okay. So again, that's where I want to give Chong and Andrews the benefit of the doubt, because maybe it was more committed. Maybe they did have a vision that was ardent and robust and more Ghibli-esque. And then Disney got in the way to say, hey, we can't have that. We have to pander to the middle because we are trying to make money. And look, they might have succeeded in that because this film is making money. And again, I feel like two edges of a sword there because, you know, we've talked about this forever. Like Pixar, like original Pixar movies doing well at the box office. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have to applaud that because we want more original films out of Pixar. When you look at their slate, a lot of sequelitis there. And look, those films might be great. I'm not trying to dismiss them off the bat, but there's far more sequelitis than there is original art being created.
Yeah.
So we need the film to do well. We need the film to do well.
Yeah.
I just hate that it's coming off the heels of a meddling executive saying, hey, don't be as thematically sharp here. We want to be more rigid and down the middle.
Yeah.
And I
honestly,
do think that hurts this movie.
I just care the commitment to whatever that vision is. If the vision was bipartisanship, then it's a flawed execution. But if it was due to meddling, then it becomes a half-ass execution because it turns the film into something that maybe it wasn't originally conceived as.
Well, and again, maybe this is conjecture, and it very much is, but that original report from a year and a half ago, that infers to me that there was more of it. If Disney is having to tell them to downplay the themes of environmentalism, they wouldn't say that if they didn't think that there was too much of it or that it was heading in a direction they didn't like. It very much infers that. Again, I could be wrong, but that's what I would assume based off of how that's worded there.
Sure.
So again, like, I'm sure those themes of bipartisanship, maybe that was always part of it, but
maybe somehow the commitment to that vision of environmentalism allowed those themes of bipartisanship to actually work its way there.
Yes.
I mean, that's again, we keep making the comparison to Princess Mononoke, but that's essentially how Princess Mononoke gets to that ending.
Exactly.
Because it commits to a certain thing, environmentalism, and then finds a way to tie both of those extreme conflicting parties together, right?
Yeah.
And that movie works. It works beautifully.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it does seem as if Hoppers was trying to use that as the blueprint, the more that we consider it here. So yeah, I think the original intent here was probably more sophisticated and nuanced and earns its complexities for sure.
Maybe, yeah.
I you know, again, that's very much conjecture, but seemingly that might have been where all this was headed. But I think as a result, a lot of those complexities come off quite flaccid here, in the long run. Yeah. And again, I don't want to be wholly dismissive of its intent. Just given the film is, you know, removing the meddling of it, just this film, the final product that we do get here. Again, those ideas of finding the good in people, being
Affable.
bipartisan, having a cordial discourse, finding a solution, those are ideas that generally speaking, broadly speaking, are good and should be implemented. I don't want to come off as some sort of cynical, the world is ending. The sun is going to explode one day. We're all going to die. Nihilistic. you know,
I know.
like I don't want to sound that way, and I think that I'm letting a little bit of 2026 rub off against this film, because in 20 years, in hindsight, hopefully I look at this conversation and go, man, I was being a bit dramatic. But in the moment, through the lens of 2026, it's hard to see the world that we're living in and go, yeah, I'm going to try to find the good in that. I don't see any good. I don't see any hope. I don't see any, I can't have a King George ethos here. I just don't see that. I don't see a world where any leader is willing to be bipartisan. Where is that? I don't see that happening on that side.
I think that's fair.
It's completely absent. All I see is death and carnage and vile leadership. And the message coming out of this is, hey, we got to scare the shit out of those people to foster change. That I find a bit provocative, even if accidental.
Well,
it's interesting though.
It is interesting, especially since when we've seen stuff like that happen in real life. It doesn't seem to work. No. Well, and that's the thing, like violence begets violence, and we've seen a lot of movies cover that over the years as well. So again, maybe all of this is a bit much for a Pixar movie that is ultimately it's inviting that, like you said.
But it is inviting it. It is. Like half of this movie is we are avataring beavers and we are flying sharks and we are squashing insects. And boy, again, that's all zany and fun and at times quite emotional and stirring. And I do really love that aspect of it. But the politics, you can't escape it. The film does invite it. And I don't think it does it well. I guess
I think that's fair.
A lot of words to say that.
No, I think that's totally fair. And I'm mostly with you there too.
All right. I don't know if I have any other thoughts here, unless you do. The animation, did we want to talk about the 3D animations? We kind of brought that up earlier.
It's Pixar. Of course it looks good. And I'm glad it looks like this, because it's not a Ghibli film. It's like let Pompoko and Princess Mononoke tackle these things better, because they already do. And let them live in that 2D animation space. Like that's perfectly fine. The animation looks great. I mean, that's never been a criticism of Pixar, has it? Like they always know how to bring their animation game.
Yeah. If Pixar or Disney wants to get into the 2D animation realm again, I would love that. I would love for Disney animated films to look like classic Disney animated films. They can go back to 2D. I just want that classic Disney 2D, not Ghibli 2D.
Yeah. I want it to have its own, Disney-like identity that separates itself from the peers. Yeah.
And that's what we love about Disney 2D animation. All of that is really great. It's fantastic. It looks gorgeous. All those movies hold up tremendously well.
I mean, geez, Pinocchio holds up tremendously well.
Yes.
The movie came out in
Cinderella,
1940.
Fantastic. Sleeping Beauty, gorgeous, incredible.
Yeah.
A lot of those 2D animated films are fantastic. Very different from Ghibli's 2D, but evocative nonetheless.
Yeah.
Certainly want more of that, for sure.
Well, yeah, because once computers get involved, that's how it ages with time, and not always favorably.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a timeless quality to when it's just, I know it's a more complicated process, but when it's just drawings on a page, that kind of always looks good.
Yeah. I recently revisited A Bug's Life and Ants as we're getting into 1998 this year. To your point, those films look like computer animated films from 1998.
They do. They do.
That's the bed you sleep in when you're working with CGI like this.
Although Pixar did find a bit of a sweet spot when the 2000s came around. And maybe it's just because we love movies like Ratatouille and WALL-E and stuff, but those movies, even from an animation standpoint, I think hold up.
I agree. Yeah.
And I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where those movies from that era ever look too dated or too fake. Yeah. There's an attention to detail in those movies that I think will always allow it to age gracefully.
Yeah, I don't really have an issue with the CG or the animation here. For me, it's about how clever, how colorful, how evocative can you make it?
Yeah.
You know, I look at something like Inside Out, for example, and I just find that film so incredibly inventive and
Yeah.
innovative. Like the animation style itself is not unique. And it's something Pixar's done for years, obviously, before and after.
Yeah.
But the way it plays with color, the way it invents a whole new world, that's where it gets exciting.
Yeah.
We have
still
never seen anything like it
still
at that
looks
point.
smooth. It still looks
Yes.
natural. There's still something tangible about that. Like A Bug's Life, for instance, that I watch that now. There is still kind of that late '90s jerkiness to it when it comes to the animation. A movie like Ants is kind of the same way. They definitely feel like they are of a time. Not a bad thing. I kind of love that for those movies. I mean, even the original Toy Story kind of has that a little bit too.
Well, yeah. And for us that grew up in the 90s, there is kind of a throwback, old school, like original Windows type of vibe that those films carry.
Those movies feel very Windows 95. They
very much so. And there is kind of a nostalgic vibe to that.
Yeah.
That we can appreciate. Now, others that don't grow up in the 90s, I can understand why they would disassociate. But for us, like there is something about it that is charming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I agree.
It does look dated, for better or worse. Anyway, with Hoppers, again, I think it's fine. Like I do like the animation here. I don't know if it's doing as much that's inventive or unique. But I do like that it's a little different from typically what we see with with
it
Pixar.
has its own vibe, which I like.
Yes. Yeah. All right. That's it. That's all that I got. Mark Motherboard's score is okay.
It's okay. Yeah, I for a little forgettable, but it fits the zaniness when it needs to.
Yeah.
I will say, as far as Pixar's most recent string of original films, let's just say since Coco, since that is top of mind as the box office results are indicating. I don't think it's one of their better ones of their original films. I would certainly take Luca over this. I'd take Coco over this. I'd take Turning Red over this.
Yeah. Where would you put this in your ranking if you had to do it right now?
Off the cuff, so this is their 30th movie. This would probably slot somewhere around the lower end of 16 through 20.
Yeah, that's probably where I'm at. I mean, right now I have Toy Story 4, Onward, Soul, Cars, kind of in that range. Maybe A Bug's Life.
Yeah, I think I have more of a nostalgic relationship to movies like Cars and A Bug's Life, so I might still give that the edge. And I might still give Soul the edge because I just love the jazz music background of that one, even though there's a particular thing that happens halfway through Soul that I think might be among the most frustrating things that I've ever seen in a Pixar film. But that's at least got an emotional core to it that I can respect.
Yeah.
So I might slightly prefer Soul over Hoppers. Hoppers for me, I'd say, is probably around like the Elemental Brave kind of territory for me.
Okay. Yeah, I think that 16 to 20 is kind of there. I think I would take it over A Bug's Life.
Okay.
Cars, maybe not so much. That one I might have to rank a little bit higher. I did recently revisit that film with
it's fun.
Sam.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's good. I do like Cars more than I thought I did on this recent watch.
Okay.
Soul and Onward I have not seen since they first came out. Onward is a little bit the opposite of this in a way where it's a lot more simple, but I feel like far more effective in what it's trying to do, especially emotionally. That I might prefer that to Hoppers, to be honest.
I'm not big on Onward, but I will give Onward a little bit of credit because it does a good job sticking its landing.
Yes. So yeah, I'm gonna have to wrestle with this a little bit more. I do think that my ranking, especially that 16 through 21 or 22, like that's gonna change a little bit. And it's like Hoppers is gonna find itself somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think so too.
So it's certainly above the bottom tier, but again, it's very much in that subjective middle, as we talked about earlier. That's exactly where I would place this.
It's better than Elio.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. Elio is probably bottom 4 for me.
Yeah, it's
And I
bottom
hate to
5
say
for me.
that. I want to like it, but
Me too. Me too. It's
God.
just such a compromised product.
yeah,
It doesn't even feel like a movie.
I know. Anyway, that is Hoppers. Again, forgive me for all the rambling. This is going to be a fun film to, I think, revisit as time goes on. And I would not be surprised if it's a little bit of that Coco thing where I was a little mixed on it on a rewatch. It jumps so high for you.
Yeah.
Maybe in time, Hoppers will do a little bit. Like, I don't ever foresee this being in like my top 15 for Pixar, but I could see it rising once I am able to separate 2026 from it and maybe give it more of a fair shake.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I'm
We'll see
gonna
where
be
it goes.
I'm gonna be so mad if I end up liking Toy Story 5 more than this one.
We'll see. We'll see.
That just sounded.
We
way-
might be
I-
on the way there. We might be on the way.
That sounded cynical. I hate being like that. Man, I do not like Toy Story 4.
I don't either. I will say I finally, because I didn't have a choice, I was in the theater with Sam. I did see the trailer for Toy Story 5 for the first time. And I was more on board with the idea than I thought I was going to be
Okay.
based off the trailer. Now, it could just be cut that way because it is a trailer. It's marketing, obviously. So we'll see. But I'm a little bit more intrigued than I was previously.
All right. Well, that's at least good. That's good.
So we'll see.
I will say the trailer for
We'll
Toy
see.
Story 5 is better than the marketing for Toy Story 4. So like
Yeah.
if one of these two films was at least attempting to convince me that it should exist, Toy Story 5 gets there a little bit closer.
Yeah. I will say, because we're going on, and this is not a Toy Story 5 review at all. So the last thing I'll say, and then we'll get out of here, is that, I was a bit worried is maybe the wrong word. I was a bit curious as to how they were going to retcon 4. And I even said that on social media, and someone was like, just watch the trailer, you idiot. And so then I did. And I can kind of see where they were coming from, because it doesn't seem to actually be retconning 4 at all. I do kind of appreciate that Woody, he does start separate from the gang. Now, how or why he leaves his current situation, that I guess we'll figure
We'll have to
that
wait
out.
and see. Yeah, if it's through convenience or genuine actions that motivate him.
I am still worried about that. Because that could be wholly contrived.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then it's going to be off on the wrong foot. But
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes. But if it comes together in this genuine, sincere, earnest way, where he finds himself back to the gang, and then them fighting off the digital age, while being very self-aware, it does seem like it's pretty self-aware in that regard. My favorite line in the trailer where I forget who says it. One of the characters, they're basically like the sentiment is that, oh, here we go again, same thing all over again. We've been through this before. Okay, so it's like the film is seemingly aware that it's redundant.
Yeah. I did laugh at some of Forky's dialogue.
Yeah.
He thinks you're old because you're bald, Woody. That's a pretty funny line.
Yeah. All right, we'll get out of here. That's Hoppers. That's Pixar. We'll see what Toy Story 5 brings later on in the year.
Yeah.
The more that I think about this and the reminder that Disney got in the way here, I think it's less of a Chong and Andrews thing. I think it's more of Disney doing what Disney does best, and that's sanitize their products.
Yeah.
At least in the modern age.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
We'll see.
unfortunate.
I still hold on to the dream that one day Disney can get back to making the Cinderellas of the world.
I mean,
And
I think Luca was one of those quality movies that could have
Yes.
been that. And if it weren't for the pandemic and this weird release structure that Pixar put in place, Luca's a $1 billion movie.
I mean, look, there are some Disney films that are doing well.
Yeah.
And that are provocative and thought-provoking and interesting and all those things.
Yeah.
But more than not, it feels like they're stepping on their own toes, at least artistically.
Yeah.
But they're making money. That's all they care about. So It is what it is.
Well, we'll have it both ways.
All right. With all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think of Hoppers. Maybe you disagree with us. Maybe we're dumb and not politically savvy enough. That's fine. I'm willing to take those criticisms. I would love to have the conversation. Please let us know. Leave a comment below in the comment section or hit us up on social media if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We would love to hear from you. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com as well. Okay, with all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.